All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a topic that is absolutely critical for any business looking to grow sustainably,
Yeah,
but it's one that, let's be honest, often feels a bit, well, dense. Or maybe like something only huge corporations need to worry about.
that's right. But our source material for this deep dive really cuts through all that. We've got the full transcript from a recent masterclass, Mastering Corporate Governance for SME Success.
SME success, yeah.
And the key there is SME, small and medium enterprises. This isn't just theory flying around.
Yeah.
It's straight from real-world experiences, challenges, practical applications, shared by founders and experts who are, deep in it with businesses like yours in Uganda.
Exactly. So our mission today is to take this incredibly rich, like ground level conversation about corporate governance for SMEs and really unpack it.
Yeah, let's get into it.
We want to move beyond the buzzwords, understand what it tangibly means for your business, why it's not just a nice to have, but actually essential for future-proofing and achieving real sustainable growth.
Couldn't agree more.
So let's dive in. So maybe starting at the beginning. What is corporate governance anyway? The panelists had a few angles that I think really resonated.
Yeah, they did. Jocelyn saw it quite broadly.
Yeah.
Not just board meetings, but everything from setting strategy, monitoring operations, all the way to managing risks. It covers a lot.
Right. The whole picture.
And Daniel added something important. It's about putting structures in place, sure. But the real kicker is living that journey.
Moving, yeah.
It demands humility from the founder. That ability to eventually step aside or at least share control as the business grows up.
That's a big one.
And Sarah gave us that really crisp definition, the structures and processes by which a business is controlled and directed. Simple, but powerful.
But what immediately jumps out, and Jocelyn made this point early, is that despite how crucial it sounds, corporate governance is often an underutilized and undermined tool for SMEs.
Yeah, that really stood out.
But she kind of hits the nail on the head as to why, doesn't she? Businesses struggle to see the immediate return on investment, the ROI.
Exactly. It feels like a cost, right?
Yeah.
An upfront expense, time, money, effort, maybe.
Sure.
But this is where the conversation got really interesting. Jocelyn spoke from her own experience at Crestfoam, and she emphasized that the true cost, it's the cost of not embracing it.
Ugh.
And that, she said, can be tremendously painful. Daniel put it even more starkly. He linked the lack of governance directly to that frankly worrying statistic in Uganda.
Yeah.
Over 70% of businesses failing within their first 3 or 4 years.
Wow. 70%. So it's not just missing out on potential gains. It's like you're actively increasing your risk of just disappearing if you ignore it.
Precisely. That totally reframes the cost conversation.
It really does. And that brings us to the core theme that emerged pretty early on. Corporate governance isn't primarily about getting access to investor money, although that helps.
Right, that's often a side benefit.
Fundamentally, it's about sustainability.
That's the word. Daniel and Jocelyn both really hammered this point home. It's about future-proofing the business.
Future-proofing, I like that.
It's building something that can last. Something robust enough to navigate challenges and, seize opportunities for the long haul, not just sprint quickly and burn out. Now, trying to define an SME precisely, with employee counts or turnover, that can get messy. It varies so much.
True.
But our source material used a really practical way to think about it. Startups, scale-ups, and grown-ups.
Okay, simple categories. I like it.
And the crucial insight here is that corporate governance isn't some one-size-fits-all jacket. It really changes as your business evolves through these stages.
That makes total sense. When you're a startup, the founder is the business, right? Wearing every single hat. Formal governance feels, heavy, maybe unnecessary.
Exactly. And here, the panel suggested an advisory board is often the right fit. Sarah mentioned this basically, a group of experts who can offer advice.
Okay, advisors.
And this can often start informally, maybe even without significant cost initially. Daniel shared Finfo's experience. They leveraged an advisory board for what he called free consultation, free advisory services.
Free advice. Nice.
Yeah. They strategically picked experts in areas they were weak in: macroeconomics, capital raising, marketing, IT. They couldn't afford big fees then, but the guidance they got was incredibly valuable early on.
That's a fantastic way to get high-level expertise without the formal overhead. But there's a warning there too, right?
Absolutely. Jocelyn warned, speaking from her experience at Crestfoam, that you can get too comfortable with just an advisory board.
Get stuck.
Yeah, get stuck. you might miss that critical point where you really need to formalize things.
Okay, so when does that happen? When do you move beyond advisors?
Well, it's as your business becomes a scale-up and starts moving towards being a grown-up, the founder just can't be in every single decision anymore.
Right, too much going on.
The team grows, you start needing heads of departments, duties get segregated. This is that inflection point where you really must formalize. Sarah outlined what this looks like.
What does it look like?
Clearly defining roles, actual job descriptions, implementing internal controls like documented processes and procedures, and, crucially, establishing a formal board of directors.
A proper board.
Yeah. This structure provides the necessary guidance, the culture, the checks and balances for a larger, more complex operation.
So that transition point
Yeah.
from advisory to formal board, when is it? The discussions seem to link it to that growth stage, right?
Exactly. When you start separating duties, have department heads, team size, maybe hitting 10 or more employees, as Jocelyn suggested.
Okay.
And it brings up that classic chicken and egg question, doesn't it?
Right.
Do you wait to grow bigger before you formalize? Or do you formalize to enable that sustainable growth?
Yeah, which comes first?
The strong argument from the panel, especially with Jocelyn looking back, was that formalizing earlier is actually the better path.
Really? Why is that?
Because having that structure and guidance in place helps inform your growth path. It gives you the framework to reach your full potential without hitting those bottlenecks later on.
Okay, that makes sense. Build the tracks before the train gets too fast.
Something like that.
And what's the key difference then between that advisory group and a proper formal board?
Daniel highlighted a critical point. Formal boards often have fiduciary duty.
Fiduciary duty sounds serious. What does it mean practically?
It's a legal responsibility. They have to act strictly in the best interest of the company. And importantly, they can legally sign off on behalf of the company. That's a big deal.
Right, real authority.
And Sarah added that this professionalization usually includes operating under a formal board charter.
A charter.
Yeah, it's basically the rule book. A roadmap defining how the board operates, how often they meet, their specific responsibilities, terms of service, all that. It signals a much higher level of structure and accountability.
This is where the source material really shines, I think, hearing the actual stories from the ground.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Daniel shared Finfo's journey, and he highlighted the role of the deal flow facility, the DFF. Sarah explained how DFF helps businesses assess their gaps and basically get investor ready.
Right. And Daniel mentioned Finfo did have structures, but they also had gaps, like most growing businesses. However, crucially, having a strong corporate governance structure already in place was a major plus for attracting investors through DFF.
So governance was a key factor even then.
It showed a level of seriousness of organization that investors really look for. It wasn't just an idea, it was an operation.
And Sarah elaborated on why that governance was so key for the investors, right?
Yes, the board provided independent assurance. They could independently look at Finfo's financials, verify the business operations were healthy, check that controls were in place.
Building trust.
Exactly. It built that crucial trust, making investors feel much more confident that their money was going into a well-managed, secure place.
So what did Finfo's structure actually look like? Daniel broke it down.
He did. They had a supervisory board, and they chose the members strategically for diverse expertise, macroeconomics, capital raising, marketing, business economics, IT, real specialists.
Not just friends and family. Definitely not. And they weren't just names on paper. They actively leveraged this board's knowledge. Got guidance on brand positioning, accessing capital, even thinking bigger, looking beyond Uganda.
Wow. What else?
They also brought in an advisory firm right from day one for market insights, competitor analysis, getting ready for funding rounds.
Proactive.
Very. Daniel really stressed the value of their formalized processes, their documentation, internal controls, clear roles. But they weren't just growing organically. They were modeling their growth for sustainability.
That's smart.
And he shared a great little story about the board pushing them towards ISO certification.
Ah, yes, the painful but valuable part.
Exactly. He called it painful for the team. Tons of work, changing processes, all that documentation.
I can imagine.
But achieving it opened doors to international partners. It built immense credibility. Plus, having independent audits was another layer building confidence both inside and out.
So all these things together.
They build trust, they foster innovation, and they make a business truly competitive, attractive to both local and foreign investors. It's a powerful package.
That's a really compelling case for being proactive with governance. But then on the flip side, Jocelyn shared that remarkably candid story about Crest Foam, a family business 37 years old.
Yeah, that was quite something. She painted this picture of their early days, Uganda's virgin market back in the 80s and 90s.
Right, explosive growth, minting money.
Almost no competition, just making mattresses and selling them easily.
Sounds like the dream, initially.
But the lesson from that early success was pretty stark, wasn't it? She explained they got carried away by that easy growth, which meant they didn't prioritize putting essential corporate governance in place early on. They missed crucial steps like proper strategy formulation, setting a clear long-term vision, planning for when the market would inevitably mature and competition would arrive.
And the cost wasn't just theoretical, she said.
Not at all. Jocelyn revealed the tangible impact. Actual leaks, money just left on the table for a very long time because the necessary controls simply weren't there.
Wow. And then came the struggle to implement CG much, much later.
Yeah, especially tough because they had a registered board that had existed for over 20 years, but remarkably had never actually met.
Never met in 20 years. That's incredible.
Incredible. And she shared the huge challenge of convincing the first-generation founder, her own mother, who initially saw Jocelyn as just a child wanting to spend money on these, fancy corporate ideas.
Ah, that dynamic. That sounds incredibly difficult, especially in a family business. How did she actually overcome that resistance?
This is such a key insight. She didn't just rely on her own arguments or internal logic. She leaned on the credibility of an external, highly regarded person.
Ah, an outsider.
Yes, the late Fabian T.I., whom her mother trusted implicitly. Bringing in that respected outside voice provided the validation, the buy-in that she couldn't achieve on her own.
Wow, that's powerful. It really shows that sometimes overcoming that deep-seated internal resistance, especially founder dynamics, needs an external champion.
Absolutely.
What was the second hurdle she mentioned facing?
The second hurdle was about empowering the board itself, shifting the dynamic from management, basically just informing the board, seeking a rubber stamp after the fact,
Yeah, just telling them what's already decided.
to truly consulting them, including them in significant decision-making before it happens. And Jocelyn noted, this requires real humility from the management side.
Humility. That keeps coming up.
It does. She used a great analogy from the Race CI matrix. Responsible, accountable, consulted, informed. She said management often treats the board as merely informed when they should be consulted.
Right, using your expertise properly.
Exactly. It highlights that just having a board isn't enough. You have to fundamentally shift how you engage with them and leverage their authority and wisdom.
These stories, the success of FinFo and the struggles of Crestfoam, they really underscore those calming fears people have about corporate governance, don't they?
Yeah, definitely. Fears about the cost, losing control, maybe ideas being stolen, boards just not being active, suspicion towards independent directors, all that stuff came up.
But the panel then pivoted, didn't they, towards how to actually make it work. So how do you navigate those challenges and make corporate governance effective in practice? It sounds like it really starts with picking the right people for your board or advisory team.
Absolutely. That's foundational. Sarah emphasized looking for industry experts, people who bring genuine value and knowledge about your sector.
Makes sense.
And Jocelyn added a crucial layer. Seek people with experience in where you want your business to go.
Ah, forward-looking.
Exactly. If you're aiming for international markets or maybe an IPO down the line, find people who've actually been there, done that. But crucially, she stressed vetting for the soft skills.
The soft skills. Like,
Their ability to truly engage in discussions, to speak up constructively, to challenge assumptions respectfully, their integrity, their actual commitment level. Are they just lending their name? Or are they willing to roll up their sleeves and contribute?
right. What does showing up as a board member really mean? Beyond just attending the meetings. Jocelyn had a powerful definition for that.
She did. It's about engaging deeply, probing, asking the tough questions, challenging the status quo when needed, being proactive, maybe making introductions, identifying opportunities, actually reading the board pack beforehand, and having a true sense of duty and care for the company's long-term success.
So it's a real job, not just an honorary title.
Definitely. And she really hammered home that the vetting and appointment stage shouldn't be casual networking. Treat it like a serious recruitment process.
Like hiring a key executive.
Precisely. Use interviews. Assess the cultural fit. Is there good chemistry with you and the existing team? Do background checks, proper due diligence. You're inviting these people into the strategic heart of your business. You need confidence they're the right fit.
And Jackie mentioned some resources for finding potential directors.
Yeah. Helpful pointer places like ICGU, Institute of Corporate Governance Uganda, Lens Africa, Boardroom Africa.
Good starting points.
Okay, so you've carefully selected your board. How do you manage the dynamics to actually get value from them?
Well, Daniel stressed that management needs to actively empower the board to do the job you brought them in for. Don't just have them, use them for guidance, for control, even to push for innovation.
Let them do their job.
Exactly. He also highlighted the importance of independent board members. These are the folks who aren't already connected to the business or the family,
Why are they so important?
because they're more likely to give you the unvarnished truth, to tell you things as they are, not just what they think you want to hear. They bring that objective perspective.
That makes sense. And having a charter helps.
Hugely. Sarah and Daniel both agreed. Having that documented charter provides a clear roadmap. It manages expectations, outlines responsibilities, ensures there's structure to the engagement and the meetings. No confusion about the rules of the game. And Jocelyn circled back to that critical point about management needing humility.
Yes, that theme again. Using her RCI framework idea, management needs to see the board as consulted on key decisions, not just informed after everything's decided.
So bringing them in earlier.
Much earlier. Going to them before the decision is final, genuinely seeking their input and being willing to incorporate it. And importantly, she said, avoiding getting defensive when they challenge your assumptions or plans.
That can be tough, but necessary.
Absolutely. And another fantastic, really practical tip that came up was building relationships outside the formal boardroom.
Oh, like how?
Have informal coffee meetings, maybe lunch, just chats. You don't always need a strict agenda. This builds trust, rapport, chemistry,
Makes sense.
which then makes it much, much easier to have those difficult, honest conversations inside the formal board meeting when you need to. Jocelyn also said, don't surprise your directors with big, complex issues in the meeting itself.
Prepare them beforehand.
Yes. Give them context, maybe a heads-up call, let them digest it. Makes for a much more productive discussion.
That makes so much sense. Building trust is key. Okay, what about the tricky issue of transitioning? Say you have an advisory board and you realize you need to move to a formal board, or maybe you need to change the composition of your existing board. That sounds delicate.
It can be.
Yeah.
Sarah noted that advisory relationships are often less formal, so maybe ending them doesn't require a super formal termination process.
Okay.
However, Jocelyn strongly suggested managing expectations right from the start, even with advisors. Maybe a simple contract or a brief charter up front that outlines the expected duration or review points.
And expectations early.
Exactly. It avoids awkwardness later. She also added that some advisors can successfully transition onto the formal board if they have the right skills and fit the new, more formal requirements.
And Gladys had a good term for why you need that change, right?
Yeah, she called it needing grown-up expertise as the business matures and faces more complex challenges. It's a natural progression.
So how do you handle letting advisors go gently?
The key is managing it politely, respectfully. You don't want to burn bridges. Gladys mentioned something called credo attachment.
Credo attachment.
Yeah, where early supporters, people who were there from the beginning, feel a really strong sense of ownership or connection. They might feel abandoned if the transition isn't handled carefully.
I see. So clear communication is vital.
Absolutely. And having that initial agreement or charter about the role's nature and expected duration can really help manage those expectations smoothly. Looking ahead now, one of the most critical areas where corporate governance really pays off long-term is succession planning.
Yes, the future of the business itself. Governor Joseph raised the point that many SMEs just lack formal plans, right? Creates huge uncertainty.
Huge uncertainty. And the board is absolutely key in driving this. Jocelyn explained they should help build a strong, high-performing executive team underneath the founder.
Not just relying on the founder.
Exactly. Actively identifying talent, developing people, being involved in performance reviews, grooming potential future leaders.
Makes sense.
She stressed the need for bench strength. You can't just have one identified successor for key roles.
Why not?
Because talent moves on. People leave. Circumstances change. You need options. She also said you should recruit not just for the current job opening, but thinking about the next role that person could potentially step into. Building that pipeline.
Thinking steps ahead.
And promoting team cohesion, making sure people understand different parts of the business, not just their own silo.
Daniel had a practical example from Finfo too, didn't he?
Yeah, implementing understudies for every single role. Someone specifically being mentored and trained to potentially step up if needed.
That's very structured.
And having clear progression plans for staff. so they see a future for themselves within the company. He also highlighted the value of open, honest feedback. He mentioned their Stanford Seed Program experience, calling tough feedback a gift that enables growth and gets people ready for bigger roles.
A gift, huh? That's a good way to frame it.
Ultimately, the goal of all these structures, this focus on talent development and planning, is simple but profound, really.
Which is?
The business must be able to outlive the founder and the current leaders. As Daniel put it earlier, it's about truly future-proofing the business for the next generation and the generation after that.
That's such a powerful legacy to aim for.
Yeah.
Now, an interesting audience question came up near the end. Should corporate governance for SMEs actually be mandated by law, like forced upon them?
Yeah, that sparked some interesting discussion. Rita shared a perspective that historically just imposing regulations hasn't worked that well.
Why not?
Because, she argued, corporate governance is fundamentally about behavior and attitudes. It's about culture, not just checking boxes on some legal form to avoid a penalty.
Right, you can comply on paper, but not in spirit.
Exactly. She mentioned alternative approaches like the King Code from South Africa. It focuses more on outcomes and uses an apply and explain principle.
Apply and explain.
Yeah, instead of comply or explain, where you just say if you follow the rule or not, apply and explain, means you explain how you are applying the underlying spirit or principle of the code, even if your specific practice looks different. It's more flexible.
Interesting. Any others?
She also referenced the IFC model, which focuses on how good governance adds tangible value at every stage of a business's growth, making it practical and relevant.
So the general feeling wasn't really pro-mandate.
No, the panel's consensus seemed to lean more toward sensitization and education, helping SMEs understand why it's important, showing them the successes, like FinFo, and also the painful failures that can happen without it, like Crestfoam's early days.
Learning from others.
Exactly. That's likely more effective than a law that might just lead to superficial box-ticking compliance. Jocelyn also added some context, reminding everyone that Uganda's SME landscape is relatively young compared to some neighbors, so maybe it needs more nurturing and guidance right now, rather than strict rules being imposed too early.
Okay, that makes sense. Focus on the why first.
Right. And finally, just as a practical takeaway, Sarah and Brenda briefly reminded listeners about the Deal Flow Facility, DFF itself, as a concrete resource people can use.
Yeah, for businesses at a certain stage.
Exactly. Specifically for those growth stage businesses aiming for funding of $500,000 or more, it provides assessment and that technical assistance to make businesses truly investor-ready. Daniel called the consultancy they provide world-class.
And people can find info on the FSD Uganda website.
That's right. Worth checking out if your business is at that stage or aiming for it.
So that brings us towards the end of this deep dive, a lot covered. What's the core message you think listeners should take away?
I think it's become really clear that corporate governance for your business, especially an SME, it isn't some luxury item or just another cost on the books. It's a vital investment.
An investment in what?
In its resilience, its potential, its ability to grow sustainably, and ultimately its very future.
And remember, it's a journey, right? Not a destination.
Absolutely. It starts simply maybe with just some trusted advisors, and it formalizes, it adapts as your business grows and its needs inevitably change.
And the real power seems to lie in choosing the right people for your board or advisory team.
Definitely. People who bring not just impressive CVs, but the right kind of expertise for where you're going. And just as importantly, those soft skills, the integrity, the commitment, the willingness to truly show up and engage for your business.
And once they're there, that relationship requires, well, that management humility again.
Yes, it's about consulting them, genuinely seeking their wisdom before decisions are made, not just informing them afterwards, and building that trust through open communication, both inside and outside the boardroom.
And ultimately, by embracing corporate governance, especially thinking about that succession planning piece.
You ensure that the business you're pouring your heart and soul into can actually thrive long after you've stepped back. You are truly future-proofing your legacy.
Future-proofing, that's the key takeaway.
As one of the speakers referenced, that old African proverb feels relevant. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Embracing corporate governance, bringing in that structure and outside wisdom, is about choosing to go far.
A great thought to end on. So maybe reflecting on your own business journey right now, how does corporate governance fit into your picture? What's maybe one concrete step you could think about taking this week, however small, to move closer to building that future-proof business you envision?